the Russians take Kiev, because this is very unnerving for them. It's an attack on the capital of a UN member state. But if there's an all-out war in which Russia is threatened, then the calculus changes. And in 2022, the Russian army was small, it was disorganized, it wasn't terribly well led. The Ukrainians were at their best, their strongest. Their soldiers were much more experienced. There were many more of them. They outnumbered the Russians at that time. I think the situation today is going to be very different, and it's going to be very different in a few months' time. Much more powerful Russian army, much weaker Ukrainian one.
One of the things that actually works against what we should be doing, let me put it a different way. What the West should be doing, especially the United States, if they wanted to put some daylight between Russia and the BRICS, and they wanted to cause some lack of support or trust, the last thing you would want to do is to mock everybody and to talk about how they're dumb, because that makes it look like we don't really understand the situation here. Here is now shifting over to the U.S. side from some dumb things. Here's one of our ambassadors, Volker, talking about this growing mass between China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Well, watch this.
Why have Russia and China been driven together, and why are we seeing such robust military exercises near one of our states?
Well, they share an interest in disrupting the global world order that has existed for 70 years and created peace for the last 70 years. China wants everything to revolve around itself, and it wants to replace the United States. Russia is just trying to rebuild the Russian Empire. So they share a little bit of a common interest. But let's be clear, in this, Russia's the junior partner. China is actually the big concern. And they're doing these exercises just as a way to try to get under our skin.
So now he was referring to, and they may still be going on, these very large 400 ship joint operations, naval operations in the Sea of Japan between Russia and China, which shows their growing cooperation. And of course, he just dismisses it. Well, this is just trying to disrupt the global order, has nothing to do with us. We're not doing anything. And Russia, they're just trying to rebuild their empire, forgetting all about the fact that NATO was coming up right to its front door, and now they've been locked in this war. That NATO and 50 nations have been doing everything in their power, economically and militarily, to destroy the Russian state. Outright say they want the strategic. This is an overt statement. We want the strategic defeat of Russia, and we're doing everything in the world to get it. No mention of that. It's just that, like, oh, they just want to rebuild the Soviet empire or something like that. And to me, when you're talking diplomatically and all these other countries you're talking about, whether it's the global South, Africa, or anywhere in the Indo-Pacific, and they hear you saying those kinds of things and see you doing something else, it seems it's going to make them even less uncomfortable about Russia finally taking some action there, rather than put more pressure on them not to.
Well, this is exactly correct. If you're talking about the wider world, let's just put Russia, China to one side. I think people in Washington ought to ask, why hasn't the wider world supported us, the West, in this conflict more solidly than perhaps than they actually are? Why are they refusing to turn up to peace conferences that we try to organize in Switzerland? Because most of them stayed away. Why are they refusing to sign final communiques and things of this kind? It's because fundamentally they see us as driving this crisis. They see us putting pressure on the Russians, seeking a strategic defeat of the Russians. And we've been absolutely open about this. And most countries around the world don't want to see that. Their instinct is, in this situation, to try to preserve the international system, of which they see Russia as a central part. Obviously, they want to see negotiations. Obviously, they prefer to see a solution. But if it's a question of seeking a Russian defeat, then their sympathies are going to be with the Russians and not with us. And by the way, the same applies to China. Now, China and Russia do have this relationship. We've pushed the Russians into this relationship with the Chinese. I can remember very well, I was, in Moscow, people talking 20 years ago about how the best position for them would be equidistance between China and the US. They didn't want to side with either power. But We are talking about inflicting a strategic defeat on them. So it's no longer a question of equidistance. It's of looking for allies. And who is the powerful ally they look to? It's China. And on the Chinese side, well, of course, they have an ally in Russia that could provide them with raw materials and all kinds of technology and diplomatic backing and intelligence and all of these things. The Chinese see this as a strategic asset, and they see the Russians as a key partner in the BRICS. And you can understand why it's all coming together. We could have played a completely different game. We could have maintained distance between these two powers. We could do it still. The Chinese are not hugely happy about this war. They don't want to see Kiev fall. They don't want to see territorial losses by Kiev because obviously they have concerns of their own there. So
Right.
do other countries. If we knew how to play this game in an intelligent, skillful, diplomatic way, we could not only bring about peace, a peace which would preserve Ukraine, but we would also be able to create real difference. We would, create space between these different countries.
Yeah. And
Instead, we're doing the opposite.
Alexander, I mean, obviously I couldn't agree with I do agree with every word you just said, but of course, if we had that capacity, the war would never have started because there was so many off-ramps available prior to February 2022. But we have chose to destroy all the off-ramps so that there weren't anything path except to war. In the last amount of time we have here, I want to ask you a question about the British side. It's a really hard question. In my previous show, we were talking about the real challenges that this could provide the current administration in the United States in terms of if the weapons are given to Ukraine to use in Russia and there's a response, because it puts even the question itself, it puts the Biden administration in a huge dilemma. Because if it doesn't give permission to this, it makes them look weak and it makes the electorate look weak right before a presidential election. But if they do allow the weapons and Russia makes good on its threat to expand the war, then, of course, it's the worst possible outcome. So it's a huge dilemma. So I have a similar question for you on the British side. If the Britain ends up either going it alone, which I can't imagine they would do, but if they did, or with the U.S. gave permission, and then all of a sudden, in response, Russia does make good on its threat, not with nuclear weapons, certainly not first, but let's say strikes British naval assets somewhere, or British forces somewhere in the Middle East, or God forbid, possibly even something from a military installation on British soil, for example. What is the British government going to do in that case? Will they literally go into a war that could almost immediately go nuclear, or will they stand down?
Well, they will panic because they don't expect such an outcome. I mean, this is something that they've convinced themselves will never happen. By the way, I would add to all of these other things that the Russians will do. Breaking diplomatic relations with London, which is not something one should underestimate. I think the Russians might do that. They've just expelled 6 British diplomats. They might move in that direction. It would probably be only the first move. The British wouldn't like that at all, by the way. But putting all that aside, I think that the thing the British will do if they find themselves in that situation is run to the United States, try to come to Uncle Sam, say, look, we've got ourselves into this terrible trouble. Obviously, we made a mistake. We got it all wrong. Please come and save us. Because what else can we do? We can't. I mean, if NATO might have difficulty fighting the Russians, we certainly can't by ourselves. But there we go.
Yeah. Well, I worry about that because I worry we would go, oh, okay, cool. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave it there. I've just been reminded that I've got to be on another show in a few minutes, Pierre. But super grateful for you. This has been a fabulous show. Always appreciate you on, Alexander, and just hope you have a good time with your lovely wife tonight.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and delight and joy to be on your show.
Thank you very much. And we will see you very soon